Amos. Skunk Ape Magic. While visiting Big Cypress Swamp a few years ago, I passed a curious place in a tiny town of Akopee, the Skunk Ape Research Center. It was mostly a zoo with large exotic snakes, lizards, alligators, and goats. But a fellow there, whom I shall call Amos, was eager to share his collection of yellowed newspaper clippings and a fuzzy photo that focused on the skunk ape. He's real, he said, wide-eyed. I've seen him 7, maybe 8 times. He's about 8 feet tall, hair all over his body, smelly, really smelly, like a skunk odor mixed with swamp gas. That's because he hangs out in all of the sulfurous alligator caves. Amos didn't exactly smell like roses either. Sweat covered half of his shirt. He looked as though he needed a shave, a haircut, and a good scrubbing. He said he had been out all night looking for skunk apes. He had strung apples in one spot, he said, because they like apples. He also laid out a trail of lima beans. I was skeptical about the skunk ape. This was Florida's answer to Sasquatch, the abominable snowman, the Yeti, Bigfoot, and the Planet of the Apes. The story first surfaced in 1970s, and enough news sightings are periodically recorded to keep the legend alive. I wonder if the creature is made up to attract more tourists to the Sunshine State. It certainly drew in its share of quacks and lunatics. Amos showed me a recent newspaper account that featured interviews that British tourists who had been riding in a tour bus. They claimed to have seen the skunk ape limbering through the Big Cypress Swamp. More fuzzy photos were produced. Most likely a man in a gorilla suit, I thought. Maybe even Amos. I glanced at a back room to see if a furry outfit was hanging somewhere. So how come no one has found bones of a skunk ape? I asked, my voice dripping with skepticism. Because this is a big swamp, he said. Things just disappear. And if the government found any bones, you'd think they'd tell us. They'd hide them like they did those UFOs that crashed in the desert. Panthers are rare, I countered, and they get killed by cars and trucks. Why don't skunk apes get hit on the road? Oh, because they're too smart for that. They're very intelligent creatures, almost like humans. The Seminoles know all about them, but they won't say much. And so the conversation went. Amos had an answer for every question, and I soon became bored with not stumping the skunk ape expert. It was time to play along, and after all, tourism and make-believe are what fuels Florida's economy. Forked over $5 to further Amos's research, bought a skunk ape baseball cap, and left to see my friend Charlie Billy. Charlie lives in one of the many Indian villages along the Tamiami Trail. They call their house Chickies. They are framed out of cypress poles, and the roofs are made from palm branches layered tightly together to keep out the rain. The sides are usually open to allow for ventilation in the hot climate. The chickies of Charlie's people are similar to those used by his ancestors in the early 1800s, with a few exceptions. For example, Charlie's chickie had a satellite dish atop his roof so they'd better reception for the colored TV. He also had a telephone and electric lights. Charlie introduced me to family members, all whom were friendly and rather shy. Before we walked to the far side of the camp, however, Charlie whispered a warning. Don't eat Grandma Susie's sofki. It was an unusual thing for him to say. Sofki is a traditional corn soup that tastes like soupy grits, a dish frequently offered to guests as a courtesy. Why, I asked. Let's just say Grandma Susie is getting on in her years and she puts herbs in her sofki by mistake that are old and powerful medicines. Things can happen. Like what? You don't want to know. I shrugged my shoulders. These could be superstitious people, I had learned. Grandma Susie was a small gray-haired woman with a sweet smile. She was rumored to be more than 100 years old, but no one knew her exact age. She carried more knowledge about traditional medical herbs than anyone alive. When she saw me, her dark eyes twinkled and she thrust a wooden spoon and a warm bowl into my hands. She nodded, urging me to eat. She didn't speak English. Charlie rolled his eyes when I not only consumed this serving, but another as well. It tasted wonderful. Walking back to Charlie's chickie after, I told him I felt great. There was no need to worry. That's what they all say, he said, sighing. He showed me a jungle hammock where I could bed down for the night. Protected by mosquito netting, I fell asleep to the buzz of flying insects and the sound of a night baseball game on Charlie's television. Sometime in the night, I'm not exactly sure when I awakened. I couldn't figure out why my feet were sticking out the end of the hammock. I moved aside the netting, stepping out, stood up, and bumped my head on a cypress rafter. That was odd. I could have sworn the rafters were more than 7 feet off the ground. Looking out over the camp scene, everything glowed in an eerie green light. Though it was dark, details of buildings were clear and distant cypress trees and sawgrass stood out. I felt a sudden urge to wander, to become part of the swamp and every living thing, from alligators to skunks. I touched my face and arms and felt thick mats of hair. That's when I leaped into the night and let out a piercing howl. The next thing I remember was waking up in Charlie's Chicky. A school bus was dropping off children along the highway. How late was it? I wondered. I realized I was naked except for a sheet that covered me, and I had a strong craving for apples. Charlie looked at me and shook his head. Told you not to eat Grandma's softy. Skunk Ape Magic was inspired by reading eyewitness accounts of Florida skunk ape and not by any personal encounters. The Skunk Ape Research Center actually exists